History isn't just a collection of heroic tales written in dusty textbooks. Behind the curtain, there are forgotten screams, hidden agendas, and the darkest corners of the human mind. Welcome to ChronoVeil, where we peel back the layers of time and stare into what most historians choose to ignore. Today, we're not simply revisiting the past. We're stepping into the shadows of Baba Anujka, the so-called healer who sold arsenic potions to desperate wives. We're entering the chilling world of Amelia Dyer, who turned infant care into a silent industry of death, and will uncover ancient forms of punishment like assassination, where justice wasn't just brutal, it was symbolic. Even the Great Depression of 1929 hides motives and mistakes far more complex than a market crash. And then there's Nero. Did the emperor really play music while Rome burned? Or was that a convenient myth crafted centuries later? If you're ready to wander through the labyrinth of history, to question what you thought you knew, and to discover that truth can be far more terrifying than fiction, then step forward. Time is opening its curtain. ChronoVeil begins now.
All right, let's talk about history. Specifically, let's talk about all those big stories we think we know inside and out. Today, we're going to take a closer look at some of history's biggest myths. And trust me, the truth is way more interesting than the fiction.
Okay, you know the scene, right? It's 64 AD. The great city of Rome is literally on fire. And up on a hill, you've got the crazy Emperor Nero, just casually playing his fiddle, not a care in the world. It's the ultimate picture of a terrible leader, and we've all heard it 1,000 times.
Yeah, well, that picture is totally, completely wrong. First of all, the fiddle wouldn't even be invented for another 900 years. But more importantly, the historian Tacitus, a guy who was actually around back then, tells us Nero wasn't even in Rome when the fire started. He was miles away in Antium. He actually raced back to the city to lead the relief effort and even opened up his own palace to give homeless people shelter. So where did the story come from? Well, it was almost certainly propaganda cooked up by his political enemies. Now, let's move on to a myth that is literally set in stone: how the Great Pyramids of Egypt were built. The image that probably pops into your head is straight out of a Hollywood movie, right? But was it really all done on the backs of slaves? That myth of slaves being whipped under the hot sun is super powerful, but the actual archaeology tells a completely different story. Instead of this disposable workforce, the evidence shows that the pyramid builders were skilled, respected workers who were paid, well-fed, and even had their own housing. So how did they get thousands of people to do the work? Through a system called corvée duty. Now, think of it like this. It was a form of taxes, but instead of paying with money, you paid with your labor. So during the Nile's flood season, when no one could farm anyway, regular citizens would work on these huge state projects. It wasn't slavery at all. It was seen as doing your civic duty. And we know these workers were treated pretty well. Archaeologists digging up the villages that were built just for them have found tons of evidence of a diet rich in protein. That's not what you feed an oppressed workforce. They had homes, communities, and get this, they even had rights. And if you need proof that they had real power, here it is. We have actual records of the world's very first labor strike, all the way back in 1170 BC. A bunch of artisans who were building a royal tomb didn't get their food rations on time, so they just put down their tools and protested. And the best part? It worked. They got their food. Slaves don't go on strike and win. All right, from the deserts of Egypt, let's head over to the sand of the Roman Colosseum for our next big myth. You hear the word gladiator, and you probably imagine a bloody, brutal fight to the death, every single time. But was the arena really just a slaughterhouse? Not even close. The gladiator games were a hugely popular and highly regulated sport, kind of like modern boxing or UFC. There were rules, there were referees, and there were star athletes who had tons of fans. And yeah, it was dangerous for sure, but death in a professional match was actually pretty rare. And this was way more complex than just two guys hitting each other with swords. There are about 30 different classes of gladiator, and each one had their own special weapons, their own armor, and their own fighting style, which made for really strategic and exciting matchups that the crowds absolutely loved. For instance, you had the Demosthenes, who fought with two swords, or the Retiarius, who used a net and a trident, which is a wild combination. There was even the Cestus, who were basically ancient boxers with studded leather gloves. Those gruesome fights to the death we always imagine, those were usually reserved for condemned criminals, the andabate, who were forced to fight blindfolded as a form of public execution. So why was death so uncommon for the professionals? It's simple. Just follow the money. A gladiator was a massive investment. You had to train them, feed them, house them. They were prized assets, like a modern football star. It made absolutely zero financial sense for their managers to let them get killed off in every match. They were worth way more alive. For our last myth, we're going to jump ahead to the 20th century. If you ask pretty much anyone what caused the Great Depression, they'll probably tell you one thing: the stock market crash of 1929. But that's kind of like saying the fire alarm caused the fire. That infamous Black Tuesday crash wasn't the cause. It was just the very loud, very public symptom of a much, much deeper problem in the global economy. The whole system was already creaking and groaning and ready to fall apart long before the stock market finally tanked. So what was really going on? Well, it was like a slow-motion car crash. First, factories and farms were just making way too much stuff, more than people could actually buy. Then, to try and fix it, governments started huge tariff wars, which just made everything worse by killing international trade. That led to companies going bankrupt and laying off workers en masse. Then, as people couldn't pay their loans, the banks started to fail, wiping out millions of people's life savings. The stock market crash was really just the final, spectacular domino to fall. So we've busted myths about Nero, the pyramids, gladiators, and the Great Depression. But why does any of this actually matter? Who cares if we get the little details right? It matters because these simple myths we tell ourselves often cover up much more complicated and much more important truths. The slaves built the pyramid story completely ignores the reality of a complex and organized society. And blaming the Depression just on the crash lets us off the hook from learning the real lessons about trade and economics. At the end of the day, history isn't a neat collection of bedtime stories. It's a messy, tangled-up web of economics, culture, and human decisions. And when we actually dig into that complexity, we get a much clearer, much more useful picture of how we got to where we are today, and maybe even where we're headed next. Which really leaves you with one big question, doesn't it? If these massive, foundational stories that we all learned in school are wrong, what other so-called facts about our past are just waiting to be debunked?
History never truly ends. It only waits to be rediscovered. What we explored today was not just a collection of forgotten figures and distant events, but a reminder of how deeply the past continues to shape our world. The decisions, tragedies, and ambitions of those long gone echo into our own lives, quietly, yet undeniably. If today's journey challenged what you thought you knew, if it raised new questions rather than answers, then ChronoVeil has served its purpose. Because history is not a finished story. It is an ongoing investigation. In the episodes ahead, we will open new archives, uncover new motives, and examine the hidden layers beneath familiar narratives, from empires that collapsed without warning, to individuals whose influence was only recognized centuries later. The past is far richer and far darker than any textbook dares to admit. If you seek clarity, curiosity, and truth, stay with us. Subscribe, share, and continue the dialogue. Tell us which stories, mysteries, or eras you believe deserve a closer look. Every suggestion opens a new path. Every path reveals another silence in the historical record. Until our next descent through time. Remember, history does not repeat itself, people do. This is ChronoVeil, and our search continues.